Superman is one of the most famous and popular fictional characters ever and is seen around the world as the quintessential American superhero. But what if Superman was from Soviet Russia? Yes, this is real. Superman Red Son is a 2020 animated film that is based on a DC comic from 2003 with the same name, in which the story follows an alternate timeline in which Superman's alien rocket ship crash landed not in Kansas but somewhere in the Soviet Union, and therefore Superman becomes a defender of the Soviet states and speaks with a very heavy Russian accent. The movie also features a Soviet Batman, by the way, which is insane. Being Russian myself, I'm always very excited to see how the USSR and Russia are portrayed in Western media, and I was very excited to check this movie out, especially considering how in 2020, when it first came out, different Russian governmental media had an absolute meltdown over it.
В смыслах красного комикса разбиралась Анастасия Иванова. Анастасия, добрый вечер.
Здравствуйте.
Ну что, снова будет русофобская истерика?
Более того, она уже началась, мы собрали яркие примеры.
Я думаю, это все завязано на серьезный проект формирования в сознании молодых людей Российской Федерации, ее союзников, нетолерантное отношение к своему прошлому.
Now, where Russian propaganda sees so-called Russophobic hysteria and an element of serious information war against Russia, I see a pretty interesting spin on a classic story that would be fun to watch and review from a Russian perspective. Superman Red Son is a very interesting mix of American and Russian cultural symbols mixed together, and it also has a bit of nice alternative history in it. And since Russian propaganda got so mad at it, it should be at least somewhat decent. So let's dive into it. Superman Red Son starts in 1946 with a scene where a bunch of village gopniks are chasing the main character, the young Soviet Superman named Somishka. Gotta love these Russian names in Western media, by the way. You know, this name is as Russian as Adamska Shalashaska at this point, meaning that it's a made-up name that doesn't fucking exist. The gopniks are distracted by Superman's childhood girlfriend Svetlana and run away. Svetlana says that Somishka needs to stop being afraid of bullies. Superman says that in fact he was running because he was afraid to hurt the gopniks, and shows Svetlana his superpowers. Svetlana tells Superman that he has great strength and needs to give his power to the Soviet state. It is at this moment that Superman realizes that he will dedicate his life to communism and the Soviet Union. We then get an intro which nicely blends the aesthetic of Soviet propaganda posters with the aesthetics of Superman. Missed out on the opportunity to use some Soviet song in the intro though. The year is 1955 and we are shown that Superman has become a symbol and the tool of propaganda of the USSR, in which he is advertised as an ultimate Soviet super soldier and is also shown shaking hands with Stalin himself. I'm sorry, I don't know why, but the fact that Stalin exists as a real character in an American superhero movie is actually both insane to me and also pretty funny. After this, we see Lex Luthor for the first time, and we are shown that he exists in this universe as an American. And in the next scene, we see Stalin again, when he's opening up a new hydroelectric power plant in the USSR, stating that Superman helped to build it. Stalin even refers to Superman as his son, which honestly, if I was Superman, I would not be getting all that excited for.
You are a symbol for all we aspire to be. The people need to hear your voice.
Okay, thanks, Lukashenko. Anyway, Superman steps up to the podium, gives a patriotic speech, and starts the power plants. Meanwhile, the Soviets notice that one of their satellites has gone out of orbit and is actually heading towards the American city of Metropolis, which appears to be something that Luthor planned. And the Soviet Superman rushes to America to save the day, stopping the satellite from crashing into the city. Superman starts speaking to the American citizens, stating that the Soviet people have nothing against the regular Americans. Lois Lane, Luthor's wife and reporter for the Daily Planet, calls out Superman and asks him for an interview. The two meet later that day and have a conversation, which essentially turns into a debate of Soviet communism versus American capitalism.
Is it propaganda to envision a world where the poor and afflicted can be lifted out of misery? Where the working classes can rise together and reshape humanity?
As a response to Superman's points, Lois hands him a secret folder which has proof of oppression and persecution in the USSR, including info about Gulags. Superman has apparently never heard about Stalin's purges, and upon reading the paper, his whole expression changes. He now realizes that his father Stalin is a terrible person who's murdered and jailed millions. Now personally, I find the idea that Superman as a Soviet citizen would have no idea about Stalin's purges or the Gulags kinda flimsy to say the least, but, you know, fair enough, he's a member of the privileged class, and maybe he just didn't know or didn't want to know. One thing I would like to say though is that I feel like the USSR and Stalin have severely messed up by letting Superman just go anywhere in the world. I get that he's an exceptional being with super speed travel abilities that you cannot exactly control, but him being able to just walk around freely in America and talk to people there means that anybody can tell him any information and indoctrinate him, which would be disastrous for the Soviets. Again, I don't know exactly how you'd be able to restrain Superman, but his freedom and ability to travel anywhere in the world would definitely not be good for Stalin. Superman, searching for the truth, arrives to some random gulag in Siberia, busting the door open in front of the guards. He walks into the gulag, which appears to be some sort of underground cavern in which people are slaving away doing hard labor and living in awful conditions. Which is historically accurate, I'll give him that. I don't know if the depiction of the whole facility being underground is realistic, but I'll let it slide. It is right here that Superman meets the Soviet Batman.
They say you can hear a leaf fall 1,000 miles away, and you never heard our cries.
So, Batman is basically a Soviet dissident in this universe, and instead of his parents being killed, his origin story is that he had to watch his parents wither away in a gulag, in which he was himself. I don't know about you guys, but I think this idea is actually pretty awesome, and it's a great spin on the Batman origin story. While inside the gulag, Superman is also recognized by a woman who turns out to be Svetlana, his childhood friend. It turns out that she was put in the gulag for knowing Superman as a regular kid, before he got his superpowers and became a Soviet hero. Which is again kinda strange, because this implies that literally every single one of his childhood friends, his teachers, his family, or whatever should be in gulags now, and it's kinda weird that Superman has never heard of the gulags or the purges even once. Superman lets all the prisoners out, and Svetlana says that it is now his mission to use his powers to liberate and save the Soviet people from tyranny. Superman comes back to Moscow and confronts Stalin directly, asking him why he does what he does and makes people suffer. The two have an argument in which Stalin says that what he does is necessary to protect the integrity of the state and the interests of the people, of course.
The unpleasant truth, my son, is that certain people must die in order for the system.
And then Superman just fucking kills Stalin.
Wise words.
Now, to be honest, this was pretty unexpected. Just imagine what kind of immense power Stalin had in the Soviet Union at that time, how many people feared him, and here he is, exploded to bits by an alternate version of an American comic book hero. I actually started laughing out loud when I saw this scene for the first time, not only because it was super random, but also just because it was kinda awesome to see. It's like a weight was lifted off of my shoulders, you know? A few soldiers who heard Stalin scream rush into the room to save him, but once they see that the leader was just killed, they all take a knee in front of Superman. Apparently, now that Stalin is gone, Superman has pretty much immediately become the leader of the Soviet Union. In real life, of course, this rapid change of leadership probably would cause some wild stuff to start happening in Russia. We need to realize that Stalin's cult of personality in the 1950s has basically reached peak levels, and people looked at him as a sort of a messiah and a savior. So his death, especially if he got murdered by Superman, would probably not fly over very easily and would cause a lot of happenings in Russia, probably Kremlin and fighting and an attempted coup or something. But I guess there's not much that can be done about the new leader when he has superhuman powers. Also, I have a question. Why did the soldiers kneel down in front of Superman when they realized that he's basically the new leader now? Is this Soviet Russia or is this Tsarist Russia? Hold the same to the Westerners, I guess.
Stalin is dead. Apparently all hell's breaking loose in Moscow.
As I knew it would when I gave you that file.
I hope this isn't a mistake.
I don't make mistakes.
Now, since I'm unfamiliar with the overall Superman story and characters, when I was watching this, I actually was not sure how to feel about Luthor. I genuinely couldn't tell if he's meant to be a good or an evil character, because he's constantly shown to be plotting against Superman, but yet he's representing America and is trying to one-up Russia by using different sly tactics all the time. And since Superman will obviously always be a very American-centric story, I didn't actually know how to react to him. But neither did I really know how to react to the Superman, because his entire story is flipped. It definitely is a pretty interesting spin on the original. We're shown that Lex Luthor is apparently working on a genetic reconstruction of the Superman, who will be fighting on America's side. Meanwhile, a new segment shows that a new war just broke out and already ended in Korea, with North Communist Korea winning. Essentially, what happened is that the now leader of the USSR, Superman, went in and destroyed the South Korean troops by himself, with the idea of unifying Korea under a pro-Soviet communist rule. Basically, thanks to Superman, in this universe, the entirety of Korea is just North Korea now. Finally, no more K-pop. But on a serious note, this is the moment in the movie where the story really goes into alternative history, and it's something that I actually really like. Luthor, who's been working on an American copy of Superman this entire time, introduces the so-called Superior Man, who's supposed to become a weapon to rival Superman himself.
America first!
Except he's racist, I guess. We're then shown Superman meeting Wonder Woman, who is an ambassador to our Amazon nation in the movie. She expresses that she thinks Superman's leadership could turn the USSR and therefore the entire world more prosperous and peaceful. They seem to be having a great time, and Superman tries to make a move on her, but is rejected. And I guess the character is implied to be lesbian. She's kind of a weird character overall, but we're gonna come back to that later. After Wonder Woman leaves, Superior Man arrives right to the Kremlin and attacks Superman.
Not an invader, a liberator. I am truth. I am justice. I am the American way.
Yeah, pretty typical words coming from an American intervention, to be honest. I think this fight is pretty boring overall, but long story short, while American Superior Man keeps getting beat up and is losing, Luthor controls him behind the scenes and increases his level of power until the level reaches too high and Superior Man essentially just starts molding and going insane. His Kremlin bot program breaks and he dies in Superman's arms because he's been exposed to too much raw power. Superior Man is no more. Now that the world once again has only one Superman, the Soviet Union can get back to world domination. We're flash forwarded to 1961, where we're seeing news coverage of the Berlin Wall being installed. Apparently, in this universe, the wall is being installed by the West to stop the spread of communism into the rest of Europe, because the USSR and the Superman is just too good. The real wall was of course installed in 1961 by the Soviet-controlled government of Eastern Germany in order to stop people from moving to West Berlin. And if in real life it's the West who wanted to take down the wall,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In this universe, it is Superman who does it.
I tear down this wall.
Which is pretty hilarious because the wall didn't even get to stand a single day. We then get a scene of the alien cyborg Brainiac attacking some city, which, well, my first thought when I saw this was, is this a Western city being attacked or is that supposed to be Soviet? Anyway, Superman battles Brainiac and manages to beat him, but during the fights, Brainiac supersizes the mysterious city using his alien technology. After that scene, we get this.
The attack on Stalingrad by the alien artificial intelligence called Brainiac has haunted the Soviet people for years.
So wait, that was supposed to be Stalingrad? What the actual fuck? So they just took an American city skyline, added an Orthodox church in there, and called that a Soviet city? In 1961 as well? Look at these skyscrapers, man. It's like they didn't try to make it look Soviet at all. Just for context, Stalingrad in 1961 looked kinda like this, not like New York City. Although maybe Superman's role was just so good that the average Russian city in 1961 looks like Wakanda, so you know, I'll let it slide. The museum guide also tells us that the whole supersized city of Stalingrad is now being kept in a jar somewhere inside the Kremlin, and the government is trying to restore it back to its previous size, which is pretty funny. It's also quite interesting that in this movie the city is still called Stalingrad, even after Stalin is no longer in power. In real life, after Stalin died, the USSR actually has undergone a serious de-Stalinization process under the next premier Khrushchev, and Stalingrad's name, for example, was changed to its original name Volgograd in 1961. So if I was the Soviet Superman that really hated Stalin, I would rename it. But alas, it seems like the Superman did not follow in the steps of the Corn Man. The guide at the Soviet Museum tells us about the current state of affairs in the USSR. Apparently, Superman reprogrammed the cyborg AI Brainiac to serve the Soviets, and with the help of alien technology, the USSR has reached great levels of success.
Poverty, disease, and ignorance have been virtually eliminated in the Warsaw Pact states, and disobedience to the party is now a thing of the past.
So I guess it's implied that now the Soviet state does not imprison or murder political dissidents, but actually just brainwashes them and controls them using alien technology instead. Nice, so Superman basically killed Stalin just to become an even worse dictator and tyrant, a neo-Stalin of sorts, you know? Suddenly, the museum-guided tour is broken up by a speech from Batman, who goes on a monologue stating that the Soviet system must be destroyed and that he planted explosives inside the museum building. So yeah, Batman is now a Soviet dissident and a domestic terrorist. He wants to free the people and take down the system, and decides to do that by blowing up a museum during working hours with a bunch of visitors, civilians, and kids inside. The least insane thing Batman has ever done, by the way. He's got a cool Ushanka though, I like it. Batman also sets off a bunch of explosives in the Kremlin and the city of Moscow, I guess? Yes, I do get that this is an alternate history Soviet Union and that American artists animated this, but really? They really stopped caring about trying to make the cities look Russian at this point. First it was Stalingrad, and now it's this. Keep in mind that this is supposed to be Moscow in 1966, by the way. Batman is spotted by the authorities and helicopters are sent to neutralize him. He steals one of the helicopters and starts flying through the streets of fake Moscow. And look, this is cool and everything, but just imagine if he was flying in between a bunch of commie blocks and Stalinist Soviet buildings and the background, instead of this generic shit. Huge missed opportunity on the part of this movie to lean in more heavily into the Soviet aesthetic in my opinion. Anyway, as always, Batman manages to magically escape the police, while Superman arrives to see Batman's goons running away in the city. Superman decides not to kill Batman's goons, but to spare and indoctrinate them with his mind-altering technology. Wonder Woman rushes in to help as well, saving people from a burning building. They also have a pretty interesting exchange.
What kind of human being would do this?
A soulless lunatic with no respect for human life.
Men.
Not all men.
Huh? When they put that in this movie? In the next scene, we see President John Kennedy and Lex Luthor in the US, taking a look at a new weapon being created by Luthor based on alien technology. This scene is basically the introduction of the Green Lantern, as the alien ship has the character's logo on it, with Captain Hal Jordan being present as well, getting assigned by the president as the head of a new military unit that will use the aforementioned alien technology. We see yet another shot of the USSR under Superman's technocratic reign. Now this aesthetic is actually pretty cool. I think it's a nice touch because it looks like it's based on the early Soviet propaganda and also Soviet concept arts of huge palaces and buildings that were planned but actually never built, such as the massive project of the so-called Palace of the Soviets, which was meant to be erected in Moscow and become the tallest building in the world in the 1930s. I think it's pretty realistic that a Superman that was raised on the promises of the Soviet utopia would make his own utopia look kinda like this. Superman and Wonder Woman are somewhere in the Kremlin, listening to the reports on the current situation in the Soviet Union.
Production is up 8%, life expectancy has increased to 97. Suicides are down since I added fluoxetine hydrochloride to the water supply. Birth rates are on the rise and...
Thank you.
Sure, everything might seem quite good, but all of this prosperity has been achieved through using the methods of controlling and brainwashing people using chemicals and alien mind-altering technology, basically turning the entirety of the USSR into a technocratic cyberpunk gulag. Wonder Woman calls out Superman, stating that he has become as much of a tyrant and a dictator as Stalin. As a response, Superman defends himself with classic whataboutism and tells Wonder Woman about what's going on in America.
A nation in decline, Princess. Economic depression, social unrest bordering on civil war, millions on the brink of starvation.
Okay, so basically America in 2022, got it. Wonder Woman doesn't really find the argument convincing, however, she expresses that she still thinks that there's good left in Superman and that he could change. Yeah, you know, so did Angela Merkel about another certain guy for years, probably. And now look where we ended up. Next, we see a scene of Superman dining with China's ambassador, and this scene just made me burst out laughing the second I saw it, because the parallels between this and the current reality are just too good. Superman's dinner gets interrupted by an explosion in Moscow, as well as a call for help from Wonder Woman. Superman decides to just let Moscow burn and arrives to rescue Wonder Woman to the same gulag he was in at the beginning of the movie, only to find her being held captive by Batman. Batman plays a trick on Superman, turning on special lights in the room, which are provided by Luthor and are meant to disable Superman's powers. Batman then beats up Superman and gives a pretty epic speech.
And there you will stay for the remainder of your wretched life, while my followers rise up and finally take our country back.
Nah, I feel him on this though, I feel him on this. But yeah, this movie pretty much turned into Batman vs Superman Soviet edition at this point. Wonder Woman manages to break out of her captivity, turns off the lights and helps Superman gain back his powers. Batman is pretty much cornered at this point, and Superman says that instead of killing him, he has plans to brainwash Batman and make him a regular wage cock in the Soviet Union. Instead of subjecting himself to an endless life of 9-to-5 shifts, Batman kills himself, staying true to his beliefs until the very end. Yeah man, that sucks. I really like Batman in this movie. There being the liberator and dissident parts obviously, not, you know, exploding kids in the museum. However, given how depressed Batman looks in every single movie I've seen of him, I can't exactly say I'm very surprised. Wonder Woman tells Superman that she can't be around him and cannot be his friend anymore. She leaves and Superman is left being truly down bad. After this, we get a flash forward. The year is now 1983 and in America, after JFK's assassination, Lex Luthor becomes president. As the news reports, Luthor managed to get the US out of chaos and rebuild the country, making America great again. We see Superman watching the TV in the Soviet palace, hearing the news about anti-communist unrest and protests all over Europe, including the Warsaw Pact states. Brainiac tells Superman that the Soviet Union is losing its grip of power in allied countries, and that America is actually doing way better these days, being a threat to the USSR by just existing.
America is like a cancer cell, and it must be removed.
Based
Basically, Brainiac offers Superman to invade America, but Superman disagrees, as his personal convictions are that the communist revolution all over the world shall not be achieved by war and bloodshed. Which is pretty respectable, you know? Not the Trotskyist, expansionist, permanent revolution worldview, but the desire to not bring more suffering into the world. I wish more Russian leaders were like this, what can I say? Suddenly, it turns out that instead of Superman, the United States basically just declared the war in the USSR themselves, sending a special military unit under the command of Green Lantern to kill Superman. And honestly guys, I have no idea if this scene is meant to be a thinly veiled critique of American military interventionism or is just here to keep up the rivalry between Superman and Luthor. The battle between Superman and the Lanterns begins, and Superman is almost defeated. However, at the very last moment, Wonder Woman comes in and helps Superman out. However, she didn't change her mind, and she once again expresses that she is heavily disappointed by what Superman had become, as well as giving a little speech about men before leaving forever.
You're just another pathetic man, aren't you?
I mean, okay, cool I guess, but I still really don't understand why they wrote her character this way. I know she comes from a land where there's only women, but maybe this is just because I like the knowledge of the DC universe and the characters overall, so this seems strange to me. And just to be clear, I'm not criticizing this from the point of view of like the Quartering or some other, you know, red pill moron trying to talk about SJW feminazis ruining our media or something like that. I do not care, I just think these scenes have little to no purpose, you know?
Women, right?
One of the funniest moments of the movie, by the way, by opinion. The fight continues, and Superman beats the Lanterns. Now that the US has basically officially attacked the USSR, Superman, together with Brainiac, start moving towards Washington DC together in order to take care of Luthor. Having arrived at the White House, Superman is surprised that Luthor is not there, and there is no military waiting for him. Suddenly, Lois Lane, who has become the Secretary of State in America, walks out of the White House holding the supersized Stalingrad in a jar in her hands. Nani? Stalingrado? Lois goes on a bit of a monologue and tells Superman that Stalingrad in a jar is a representation of what he turned the Soviet Union into. A world in a bubble, a world that is fully controlled and that is populated by people who have no free will. In fact, it turns out that all this time the technology to restore the city of Stalingrad to the normal size has been there, but Brainiac did not utilize it, thinking that he knows what's best for the Soviet Union better than Superman himself. Lois gives the Stalingrad jar back to Superman. He puts his actions into perspective and realizes that this is not the way to go forwards and that his citizens deserve free will. However, this touching moment of realization for a man who's been a dictator for like the last 30 years is ruined by Brainiac, who decides to rebel against Superman and shoots the Stalingrad jar, destroying the city. Lex Luthor, the president of the United States by the way, finally arrives to the rescue like 15 minutes later and fights Brainiac together with Superman. The newfound duo break through Brainiac's defense field and his AI activates a self-destruction sequence that could basically annihilate the entirety of the planet. Superman realizes that this is the moment where he can make it right and decides to sacrifice himself to save the Earth. As he's hurling Brainiac's ship away from the planet, he hears the voice of Svetlana, his childhood friend that told him he would one day save everyone. The Brainiac ship explodes in space. The world is saved and the Soviet Superman is no more. After this, we get a scene in which Lex Luthor is given his concession speech near the US Capitol, about to step down from the US presidency. Luthor states that the Soviet Empire is collapsing and that the United States will reach out to give aid and help the Soviet republics rebuild and live a normal life. I don't know exactly why the Soviet Empire is collapsing, by the way, because it seemed like the country was actually doing pretty good thanks to all the alien technology, and there was no dissidents either because they were all brainwashed, so there's no people that would actually feel discontent with what was going on, and the cities look like Wakanda in this universe, so I don't know. The Americans just had to win the Cold War for the purpose of the story, I guess.
Be assured that in time, all the Soviet nations will gladly and willingly join us in the formation of a truly global United States.
What?
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Okay, I mean, look, I get that I'm looking into this too deep, and this is basically a movie for teenagers, and Superman will always be a very American-centric product, but why would the USSR, or whatever is left of it, want to become the part of the global United States? Just so that countries like the Baltics, who have been under Soviet occupation for decades, can now succumb to another type of new occupation? I mean, imagine if a real American president at that time, you know, George H.W. Bush would say something like this when the Soviet Union fell apart. apart. I just think it's funny. The original Superman Red Son comic goes even further with this though. In the comic story, the formation of the so-called global United States leads to the establishment of American rule over the entire world, which of course leads to unprecedented peace and prosperity. In the comic, Luthor's work leads to many scientific achievements, including the curing of all known diseases and the colonization of the solar system. Now again, this glorifying of American expansionism is something that I would expect from Superman. The idea here is basically that the only thing that holds the world from, becoming fully prosperous and peaceful is the lack of American world domination. If there was a one world government led by America, we'd all be living in Wakanda now. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not getting mad at this. I'm not like some ultra patriot of Russia or something. I just don't think that world domination by either the United States or Russia would be beneficial for anybody, and it would definitely not suddenly send the world into unprecedented peace and prosperity. As much as this movie seems to be about free will and freedom, as well as about cooperation and friendship between different nations, it seems like this movie only criticizes colonization, expansionism, and the desire for world domination if it's coming from the Russian side. If it's American domination we're talking about, well, that's just common sense, because that's for the better interest of everybody in this world. And I just don't really agree with the sentiment, to be honest, because in my opinion, colonization and expansionism are not quite based, no matter who they're coming from. Also, I don't really understand why Luthor is shown to be this benevolent and peaceful character at the end, because in the movie it's not only implied that he orchestrated the fall of the Soviet satellite on Metropolis, but he has actually technically attacked the USSR and Superman 2 different times now. First it was the Superior Man, and second it was the Green Lantern. I mean, fair enough, Superman is no saint either, he's destroyed South Korea and the Berlin Wall, but still, Luthor himself literally tried to overthrow Superman and colonize the USSR like 2 times in this movie, and now somehow he gets to speak from the position of the peacekeeper.
Yeah,
Anyway, back to the movie. While Luthor gives a speech to the people, Lois Lane spots glasses-wearing Clark Kent-looking Superman in the crowd, who disappears in the next shot. Luthor introduces the next president of America, James Olsen. We then get a patriotic zoom-out shot of Washington DC, and the movie ends. From what I've gathered online, this movie actually has gotten a bunch of flack from DC fans because compared to the comic, the ending of the Red Son movie was changed. In the comic, thousands of years into the future, one of Lex Luthor's descendants sends his son back to the past, and that son is Superman. And his ship ends up landing in a Ukrainian collective farm in 1938. So technically, according to the story of the comic, the Soviet Superman was sent to the USSR by America for some reason, while the movie just assumes that he is of alien origin. Regardless, I thought that this movie was a lot of fun. Even though I think some of the characters are badly written like Wonder Woman, or some characters just don't get enough screen time like Batman, and I feel like the Soviet theme could have been elaborated on more, and the movie could have been more aesthetically interesting if the animators actually tried to make Russia look like Russia, it's still a very entertaining watch. Seeing Stalin get annihilated and seeing Superman wearing a hammer and a sickle on his suit is pretty wild. Despite the questionable ending that peddles the idea of American world domination being the ultimate good, I think that overall this movie has a pretty decent message. By putting a familiar character like Superman into a completely new context and environment, we get to see how just changing your birthplace changes your entire life, your entire sense of purpose and all of your actions, and even such an outstanding person as the Superman can be affected by this. I think the movie wants to say that people are not born evil and they act the way they do because of many factors. May that be their upbringing, their social circle, what they've been taught in school, the events they lived through, the level of financial wealth, or the information they consume. Superman's dictatorial tendencies are not something he was born with. He's merely a product of his environment, just like all of us, just like me, and just like you. And I think this is an especially important message today when there is so much hate and so much pain in the world, and people are looking for a scapegoat. It's very easy to just point at the other and blame every single person from a certain social group instead of looking into the problem and listening to each other. I think what this movie wants to show is that one thing we should always remember is that we should never blame an entire race or nation of people for something, as every single person in one of these groups is unique, and different races or nations are not more predisposed to hate, to violence, or to being governed by tyrants. Moreover, Superman Red Son also shows that anybody, if given the right moral guidance and help, can still change and become a better person. Overall, I think I'd give this movie a solid 7 out of 10. This rating is not based on anything except for purely inflated numbers in my head, because I'm not a movie reviewer and I'm never claiming that I am one, okay? But nevertheless, I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you guys did, then please make sure to slap the like on it and also subscribe for more. And as well, if you guys want to support my channel additionally, you can go over to the link down in the description and become a YouTube member. It's basically a way to donate to me and support me. It's kind of like like YouTube's own version of Patreon, except it's actually easier for me to get paid. And I really appreciate everybody that helps me out. So yeah, link down in the description if you want to do that. And this is gonna be pretty much it for this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.